a new handout for the rest of the unless there's some on the... No, but I haven't given you one for what we're going to do this morning yet. I'll probably give it to you next week. Do what? Yeah, but what I'm doing this morning, I hadn't given you a handout for. I'm still working through it. Yeah, that's just through the end of 16. We're actually going to do 17 this morning. So technically, there's no handout yet for it. Michael, you got me turned on? Okay. Good morning. We're glad everybody's here. We're about to, a couple minutes past to get started. Got a few people still coming in. We want to thank you for your presence as we continue through the book of Revelation. Hold on, let me try this. Does that help? Okay. Well, we've got this so I can move around, but it turns out I can't move around because if I don't have this, or I have to hold it out here somewhere, we have issues. All right, let's go ahead and start class with a prayer. Father in heaven, we thank you for this day. We thank you for this time that we could come together. We thank you for your word and for your revelation to us and a recognition that you have not given us that which we cannot understand, but a message that with some initiative and time and prayer and desire we can uncover and see the message that you've given us. We thank you for the revelation. We thank you for the ultimate message of victory. May we remember that comes in our fidelity and faithfulness and worship of you. And we are reminded today especially that Jesus Christ is the center of all the grace and mercy that you have to give. And may we cherish him, and may we learn more about him, and may we live more like him. And in Christ's holy name, amen. I didn't give you a handout today. I started putting one together, and I didn't like what was in it because I was trying not to include a lot of the detail, but I wasn't, anyway, I just didn't like it. So next week, I will give you a handout on 17, 18, and 19 probably, and maybe even the rest of the book, depending on how far I get with putting it together this week. But when we get to chapter 17 of the Revelation, understand that the story of the book, as far as its historical context, ended at the end of chapter 16 with the pouring out of the seventh bowl of wrath. The statement in 16:17, it is done. Then the seventh angel poured out his bowl upon the air, and a loud voice came out of the temple from the throne saying, "It is done." What is done? Well, remember that apocalyptic literature has certain characters, certain entities that are a part of it. And the primary or the larger picture is always that of an oppressor and those who are oppressed. And in this case, what is done is the oppressed have been liberated and the oppressor has been destroyed. Now, in the context of this physical world in which we live, the oppressed were those early Christians who were oppressed by the Roman Empire, and the oppressor is the Empire of Rome. And when it says it is done, this is the end of the Roman Empire. So at the end of chapter 16, what God told those Christians he would do back there in chapter 6 in that key statement, "How long, O Lord, before you will avenge our death?" And he says, sit down and you're going to have to be patient, but I've got things that have to happen. More of your brethren are going to die. Not a message we really want when he tells John to eat the little scroll and it's sweet in his mouth and it's bitter in his stomach. The idea there is that you're going to get what you want, but you're not going to like all the details. Well, as all that plays out, God keeps his promise. And by the end of chapter 16, he has done exactly that. He gave Rome warnings through physical disaster, natural disasters, through allowing them to experience the consequences of their own action, through the eroding of the borders by various tribes and groups in a military fashion of the empire. And then finally, in chapter 16, he uses those same means that are symbolized in the bowls of wrath that are poured out to actually destroy the empire. So it is good to remember as we move into chapter 17 that what happened in chapter 4 is still very true. Today, it was true then, and that is God is on his throne and he is directing, whether anybody wants to admit it or not, and there are plenty in this world that don't, what happens with the empires and the seats of power in this world, that he really is. We say that often, and it almost becomes cliche for some people, and they kind of lose the force of what we're saying. But the revelation very clearly reminds us that as much as this world seems to be out of control, that it is not. And that again, what you and I need to do is be faithful and worship God, regardless of whatever we see happening around us. Now, if you were listening to this letter for the first time and you got to the end of chapter 16 and basically the action is done in terms of this physical world and the immediate historical circumstances that are being dealt with, you might need a little bit more information, or maybe you want just a little bit more confirmation to make sure and to put your mind at ease as to exactly who we've been talking about. Well, that's what happens in chapter 17 and 18 and even going into 19. We're not moving forward. We're not adding to the account that has been recorded, but we're getting additional information to make sure that we do know exactly who it is that was the oppressor and who it is that God has brought, as the book has already said, his winepress of wrath upon. So in chapter 17, we get that information just to clarify what has happened and who it's happened to. So in chapter 17, we meet this woman called the harlot. Well, that should tell us something about her pretty quick already. And she is destroyed. In verse 3, it says, "And he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast." All right. We met two beasts in the book already. We met the first beast, which is the Roman Empire, and the second beast, which is the cult of emperor worship. Well, she's sitting on this beast, so that would suggest very clearly, just like if you're sitting on a horse and you have a bridle and the reins, then you direct the horse where it's going. So the idea here is this is the one that is directing the beast, full of blasphemous names, having 7 heads and 10 horns. All right, the Roman Empire has already been described this way, so we're not surprised by what we come across here. Again, this is just to solidify that you already know what you know, mostly for clarification. So the woman, verse 4, was clothed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a gold cup of abominations and the unclean things of her immorality. Okay, so much like the great cities of old, or I saw some pictures the other day. We say the cities of old. Back in the 1920s, Henry Ford built a theater in Detroit. I don't know if you know this, but at that particular time in history, Detroit was the richest city in the world. And if you go there now, it's very, very different. And the documentary I was watching was showing this theater that is now a parking lot for some credit card company. And you can look up at the ceiling and you can see some of the unbelievable artwork that was in this place, in the archways. But it's all coming down and it's all crumbling. You can think of all kinds of examples throughout history of cities that were built with unbelievable opulence. Even today, we can see that, although we don't really live in a time when that's something that is done now. The idea here is that Rome looks so good and so beautiful. Even Paul, on one occasion, he said, "I must go to see Rome." This was the destination in the world. When we think about places that people want to go, they want to go and they want to see today. That's what Rome was. It's this beautiful, incredible city of its time. But the reality of it is that under that facade, underneath all of the architecture and underneath all of the beauty, it was just rotten. Because the people in it were rotten. They were immorally rotten. So it's not about what things look like on the outside. It's about what they really are on the inside that determines destiny. She is full of unclean things in immorality. And in verse 5 it says, "And on her forehead a name was written, a mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots, and of the abominations of the earth." Now, you might say, well, what does Babylon have to do with any of this? Well, for the Jews who spent time in captivity and then came back, as we see in the Old Testament in the times of Ezra and Nehemiah, Babylon just became a term that was synonymous with wickedness and evil. So if you wanted to call someplace terrible or awful, you just called it Babylon. That didn't mean it was actually. That's just a word that you used to say that, and everybody understood what you meant. Now, if you keep going through this, you find verse 6 says, "And I saw the woman." What was her state of mind? She's drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the witnesses of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered greatly. All right, the picture there, if you've ever seen somebody really intoxicated, just staggering around, they're so full of alcohol. She's just glutted herself on death and the destruction of God's people. So as we go through this again, you start to understand why it is that Rome had to fall. If you go over to chapter 5, for example, chapter 18, verse 5. Not chapter 5. Chapter 18, verse 5. Here, still talking about, this is, chapter 18 will get into the impact of the fall of Rome on the world at large. Okay? This is a lot like if the New York Stock Exchange tomorrow just melted down. I mean, it's over. And all that money and all of that wealth just went away. It would reverberate around basically the entire globe. And that's the idea that's conveyed in chapter 18. What happened to these people? But notice along the lines of she's drunk with the blood of the saints, in 18:5 it says, "For her sins have piled up as high as heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities." Okay? Now, notice verse 6. People will talk about the love and the grace of God and all of that. But for Rome, because of the path that they chose, it says, "Pay her back even as she has paid." So this is payback. What's the one thing we say as Christians about being in the blood of Jesus? Well, there's other things we say too, but the whole point of being in Christ is that I'm not paid back for what I've done. I mean, that's called grace. We're going to talk about that quite a bit in the sermon this morning. But here is Rome being paid back. And then over again, give it to her doubly. So she decided, and I say she, the civilization of Rome, from the people that were in the bureaucracy and in the ruling class, the emperor, the senate, the governors, all of those type of people, right down to the people that lived every day, decided that it was perfectly fine to persecute and attempt to commit genocide on a group of people, in this particular case, those who had given their life to Christ. All right? They thought that was a good idea. That was a good plan for civilization. That was going to make their world stable. All right? This is the lie they believed that came directly from Satan, as earlier in the book we find out that they were those that were guilty of worshiping him. Well, what's the end? To the degree, verse 7 in chapter 18, that she glorified herself and lived sensuously, to the same degree give her torment and mourning. For she says in her heart, I sit as a queen, and I am not a widow, and I will never see mourning. See, the idea there is nothing bad's ever going to happen to me. I can do what I want. I'm in a position of power, and the decisions that I make are mine to make. And ultimately, I'm going to be victorious. And the truth of that matter is, unless you're in Christ, that's not the case. And that's a big lesson in the book of Revelation. So when we see the Babylon the Great here, the mother of harlots, this woman, back to chapter 17 and 6, drunk on the blood of the saints, she is definitely going to be destroyed, and is destroyed. And so verse 7 of chapter 17 says, And the angel said to me, Why do you wonder? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and the 10 horns. Now, I'm not going to get into giving you lists of kings and all that kind of stuff this morning. There are commentaries that will do that. But when you get to verse 9, you really start to understand what is being said here. Not that we don't already know, but there's some dead giveaways in this section. Just to solidify that we are in fact talking about the city of Rome here. That is this harlot. So the 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. All right. Well, if you go to Rome and you get in a tour bus or you ride in a car, you'll notice you go up and down an awful lot. That's because the city is built on 7 hills. So who are we talking about in chapter 17? Who's the harlot? The same person we were talking about in chapter 16, the same one that we've been talking about all the way back to when God promised that he would bring judgment. And all of this is just to solidify who it is that is fallen and who it is that is the oppressor that's going to be destroyed. Now there's a discussion in the latter verses of this chapter from about 10 through 13 about listing kings and so forth. And like I said, I'm not going to try to do that in here. I might give you a chart or something later on. But some of the commentaries will attempt to give you exactly which kings are being spoken about. But these are the kings of Rome. These are the emperors. And verse 14 is what is important. It says, These will wage war against the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them. And why will the Lamb overcome? Okay? Remember, this overcoming is a major theme in the Revelation. You are overcoming if you're in the company of the Lamb, which I still find, and I think God smiles a little when he puts it this way, because it's a lamb. There's nothing particularly threatening about a lamb. If you've ever held one or been around one, this is the cutest little cuddliest creature that ever was. And so here is Rome from a human perspective that has had the Roman legionnaires and has had an army the likes of which the world had never seen before, that would just march across the ground and destroy what was ever in front of it, or whoever was in front of it. And now they're going to be beaten by a lamb. Okay? It's just a reminder that, well, Isaiah 55 says, God says, my ways are not your ways, and my thoughts are not your thoughts. Okay? You got to learn to think different if you're going to be a child of God, because God is operating in a very different way than you and I would perceive or think that he should, perhaps. So He's overcome, though. Why does the Lamb overcome? Because he is Lord of lords and King and the King of kings. So clearly this is Christ. And those who are with him, and I love this designation, by the way. There's a threefold designation of those who are with Christ. All right? They are the called, they are the chosen, and they are the faithful. Okay? Now, they're called. How? How were you called? By the gospel. Yeah. Second Thessalonians 2:14. You were called by the gospel. So people went out and they carried the gospel. It started with those 12 apostles, and then it spread. And that message spread, and people simply answered that message. And when they did, they became the chosen. Who are the chosen? The ones that answered the call. And once they were chosen, they said, I like being chosen. And the result of that is that I'm going to exhibit faithfulness to this worldview, to this reality of Jesus Christ. One of the things that really stands out when you look at the early Christians, when you go back and you read the things they wrote, and I'm talking about, you can see this certainly in the book of Acts, if you want to look at it biblically, but also in the writings that we have of early Christians that are not biblical, uninspired writings. They didn't believe in the religiousness, if you will, or the religiosity of Christianity. That it was out there somewhere, or it's just this feeling that I have inside of me in some way. But in the reality of it, that Jesus was born of a virgin, that he lived, that he died, that he was raised, and that this had real implications, that these things happened and in a particular place, and there were certain people that were there, and you could go to those places. And you could talk about what happened not as a religious experience so much, but as reality. And as a result of that, there was something you could really get a hold of because it was real. And you could believe it because it happened. And that permeates the early church. Not kind of what we might say, the touchy-feely religion that comes later. But my life is what it is. My faithfulness exists because of what has actually happened and what is happening. And that's a very powerful point about Christianity. That you can go, even today, you can go to a place and you can say, Jesus Christ walked here. Or you can go to Rome and you can say, Paul walked here. So it's a good thing to remember that when we talk about why am I faithful, we can talk about that for a long time and really delve into it. But one of the primary reasons is because when I get into this, I'm looking at things that really happened. The body of Jesus was really put in a tomb. 3 days later, that body was really gone. And everybody knew it. Okay? So if I was one of the chosen, what does that do? That makes me faithful because I have a reason. I'm not just talking about religious ideas. I'm hanging my life on reality. So he says in verse 15, the waters which you saw, where the harlot sits, are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues, and the 10 horns which you saw, and the beast, these will hate the harlot, and will make her desolate and naked, and eat her flesh, and will burn her up with fire. Wow, what is that talking about? All right, well, somebody ascends to power. A president ascends to power. Donald Trump is experiencing this right now. And there are people knocking on his door. They want in the White House, and they want to sit down and they want to tell him how great he is. People that previously, he commented the other day, I thought this was funny. He said people that hated me and wanted to destroy me all now want to be friends with me. All right? So the point is, when you're in a position of power and people think by attaching themselves to you that they themselves can benefit greatly from that, then they're going to flock to your door. Well, this is what happens with Rome. If you're in good with the emperor, then you can get all kinds of deals in what it's going to cost you to ship your goods. I'm talking money here. Or maybe you can get a break on taxes. Times have not changed. People still want the same things. All right? Maybe you don't have to deal with that ugly word tariff that gets thrown around. That kind of thing. So you're attaching yourself to Rome, and that's what is happening here. But guess what happens when that power starts to slip? Those same people that thought you were so great, all of a sudden decide you're not so great. Maybe they just want a piece of you because they're just as selfish as you are. So what happens? The rats begin to eat one another. And that's what happens here, and that's what is being illustrated. All these client kings and these client civilizations that had attached themselves to Rome because that was going to make them rich and wealthy now are turning on the city of Rome, and you have this cannibalism that now takes place to just destroy the city. Notice who does this, by the way. Verse 17, we need to stay in perspective. Remember, all the way back to chapter 4, God is sending out those horses, and those are illustrative of the powers that he has over economies and over nations and over military forces and so forth in this world. All right? Verse 17 is a reminder of that. For God has put it in his hearts to execute his purpose by having a common purpose and by giving their kingdom to the beast until the words of God will be fulfilled. All right? So God turns the hearts of these client kings to destroy Rome. This is their purpose. Now, keep in mind, as I said a moment ago, as we think about Isaiah 55, the purpose of God was being fulfilled through all that happened to these early Christians. So you should demolish any idea in your own mind, if you still hold on to it, that if you are a good Christian, that bad things are not going to happen to you. The reality is, if you're a good Christian, some of the worst, most unimaginable things may happen to you. And that is a part. Remember when back to John eating that scroll? It was sweet in his mouth and bitter in his stomach. That's the bitter part. The sweet part is that if I will bear up under that and I will remain faithful, then in the end I'm going to win. In the end I am victorious. In the end I am rewarded. But the bitter part is becoming a Christian is no guarantee of an easy life. And it may be a guarantee of a very difficult one. And that's part of the message of the Revelation. And then finally at the end of verse 18, John says, the woman whom you saw is the great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. Okay? So if you've been confused to this point and you just don't know, and all this stuff about harlots and Babylon and all this, just highlight that one line in chapter 17 and ignore everything else in the whole chapter. You ever have a minister tell you to ignore the Bible? Well, there you go. Now you have. All right? That is a blatant statement that we're talking about Rome. Okay? There's just nothing else. So again, when somebody asks me why I give you the book of Revelation in the way that I do and why I'm not giving you some modern fanciful interpretation, the answer is simply because that's not the interpretation the book demands, if you just let it be what it is. We're talking about the city of Rome, and Revelation 17 and 18 is a guarantee that's what we're talking about. Now, and I highly suggest you don't do this because it gets so absurd and ridiculous. But if you do look into the premillennial doctrines and so forth that are out there, they have to go into these, what Wayne Berger, one of my former teachers, used to call a state of high-octane speculation, in which we have sometime in the future this revived empire of Rome, that Rome will rise again and become the center of power in the world, and it just goes absolutely crazy. Another reason to reject such a silly interpretation of the book of Revelation is when you understand, and something I've tried to say over and over again, that the purpose of apocalyptic literature is to bring hope to an oppressed people. Okay? And if this is somehow in the future that we're looking at here up to chapter 17 and through 18, we're going to get to the future when we get to chapter 20. Okay? If it's somehow in the future, then you would have the absurdity of God sending this letter to these 7 churches of Asia who are undergoing oppression and saying, hold on to your hope. A couple thousand years from now, I'm going to do some stuff. Good luck. No, that doesn't work, does it? See, it has to be set in a historical setting, and it has to be the historical setting of those that are actually experiencing the oppression. And that's why I teach it like I do, because that's what it demands. Okay, now chapter 18, we've got just a little bit of time here. We'll look at this. Why do these client kings turn on Rome? So why does Rome not only implode internally, but why do all these people that told Rome how great she was and how wonderful she was, why are they coming at her? And now, what are the implications of all of this? If you go down to about verse 11, I'll skip through some of the early verses and get to the meat of this. And the merchants of the earth weep and mourn over her, because no one buys their cargo anymore. Okay? So what are the implications of Rome falling? All right? Well, you turn the television on, and the NASDAQ, not only has it dropped, but it doesn't exist anymore. Okay? The S&P 500 hasn't just plummeted, but it's not there anymore. Okay? Total and complete economic meltdown. Their worldly goods that they put so much emphasis on, they're get rich, get rich, get rich. How often do we hear that? Now, we're going to do whatever we need to make money and to build this economy and so forth. And how many times have you heard in a political campaign, it's the economy, stupid? No, it's actually the morality of a people that matter. No empire, by the way, if you study history, has ever fallen because of debt and economic matters. They've all fallen apart based on moral issues. Okay? So here they were, all worried about making money. And guess what they don't do in the end? They don't make any money. Because now the actual economy and the means of moving goods and services that Rome had protected. One of the things you'll note if you study a history of Rome was, I forget the actual phrase, but it translates the peace of Rome. Rome took to the water. They took to the Mediterranean Sea, and they stopped piracy early on in the empire. So with the Romans in the water and on the shores at the ports, you could put your wares and your goods in a boat, and you could go right across the water, and you didn't have to worry about anything because of their force and because of their presence. A lot of, actually, if you want to parallel, the United States since World War II has done exactly the same thing. There's a reason why people can circumvent the globe, and you don't have to worry about your ship being boarded and you being murdered. Times don't change much. But that ends. And so now, verse 12, cargoes of gold and silver and precious stones and pearls and fine linen and purple silk and scarlet. So the idea here is all of this incredibly wealthy, sumptuous stuff. You're making a lot of money selling it, and the people that are buying it, they got a lot of money too, and everybody's living high on the hog. very costly wood and bronze, iron and marble and cinnamon. They go on. And then notice at the very end of verse 13, cargoes of horses and chariots and slaves and human lives. See, they didn't care about human beings. That's not a new thing. Just the other day, right here in Russellville and around the state of Arkansas, there was a bust on human trafficking, right? Okay, well, that's what these people were doing. They were trafficking in human beings as a thing to sell, all right? So you start to understand in the book of Revelation why it's stated more than once, pay them back for their sins. They deserve what they get. You come to a place in the story where you no longer have any sympathy for those that are involved in these kinds of things. And the sympathy of God runs out as well. Now, let's see, we got about 9 minutes, so let me jump a little bit here. But at the same time, if you go down to verse 20 of chapter 18, it says, rejoice over her, O heaven, and you saints and apostles and prophets, because God has pronounced judgment for you against her. Okay? Multiple times in the Bible, there is this idea of leaving room for the judgment of God. Okay? That God will do this. So we live in a world just like they did, in which we see things. And we would like to see people punished for what they do. And God says, leave room for my judgment. Leave room for me to make a decision here. I will. And the Revelation is telling us that, among other lessons, that the people involved in these sorts of things that we see seemingly getting away with what they're doing, running under the radar, we might say, or getting off on a technicality in a courtroom. They are not getting off of anything, because 2 Corinthians 5 says that there's a day coming in which we must all stand before the judgment seat of God and give an account for that which has been done in the body, whether it be good or bad. And the Revelation is a reminder of that when you look out into the world and you see this unbelievable corruption and wickedness, that there's going to be a reckoning with the creator of the world for that. And that is beyond anything that you and I could possibly be a part of administering in this world. And it will be final. On the flip side, there's going to be a victory for those. And we want to hold on to that idea. See, rejoice over her, O heaven, and you saints, you holy ones. All right? So there's no rejoicing amongst those who decided to traffic in human flesh and who decided to make life about money and selfishness and the destruction of others for personal gain. But there is rejoicing from those who chose to do the right thing now, even though it was painful and hard and very unpleasant. Now, just to remind you, this is 2,000 years ago, and those people who are rejoicing now in the book still are 2,000 years later. See, it's not quite so difficult to think about enduring something now if I can realize, at least in some way, and probably I should put a number on it. We'll see that when we get to the 1,000-year reign. In my own brain, we talk about eternity. It might help me to put a number on it and say, but I'm going to enjoy myself for 10,000 years. See, I can. Then it kind of comes home to me, because when somebody says, well, we're stepping into eternity, well, I can neither find the beginning of that or the end of that, so it just makes my head hurt. All right? So that's where we are when we come to the end of chapter 18. The sound of the harpist, verse 22. The musician, the flute player, the trumpeter will not be heard in you any longer. The craftsman, there will be no craftsman of any craft in you any longer. The sound of the mill will not be heard any longer. The light of the lamp will not shine in you any longer. The voice of the bridegroom will not be heard in you any longer. Your merchants were the great men of the earth, because all the nations were deceived by your sorcery. Okay, see, this is demonic. This is what we talk about when we talk about satanic or the worship of demons. That's what is really happening here. And in her was found the blood of the prophets and of the saints and all who have been slain on the earth. So starting in verse 22, basically what John is reiterating is that everything that makes civilization is over. Nobody is going to have any resources. Nothing is going to happen as it did. You're not going to hear anybody play music. There's not going to be any stores open to go and buy anything. There's not going to be anybody to make anything. This is desolation. And again, I'll reiterate, if you study any good Roman history about the western part of the empire, the eastern part of the empire will continue until the Turks finally come in and take Constantinople many years later. But as far as the western part of the empire goes, when it falls, what is ushered in has been called the Dark Ages, which interestingly enough, that's a title that was given by intellectuals later on, because actually what happens in the quote-unquote Dark Ages is people become much more interested in God, interestingly enough. And later intellectuals thought if you didn't have a scientific reason for something, if you had to turn to God for an answer, what kind of idiot were you? So you must have lived in the Dark Ages, which they were actually a very enlightened time. That is what will follow. Now, we've got just a couple minutes here, and I probably ought to stop. But let me just point a couple things to you in verse 19 as we close. In verse 9, we have the marriage supper of the Lamb. Okay, where are the 144,000 that we've carried through this book? Those that were faithful and true to God, the called, the chosen, and the faithful. Now they sit at the table with Jesus. And the whole idea there is a complete and total acceptance. It's the idea of you welcoming somebody into your house. You're going to cook them dinner, and they're going to sit at your table, and they're going to live with you because of what you think of them and the fact that you want them to be family. That's the idea. And if you want to think about Christ in a correct view that most people don't have today, read from verse 11 through about verse 16 and look at this description of what we call the victorious Christ. He has a very different position than a lot of people would give him today. He's not just somebody in heaven just sitting on a throne. He is active and extremely powerful. And then by the end of chapter 19, the beast and the false prophet are seized, and they are thrown into the lake of fire. All right, so that's their end. And when we think of the lake of fire, we think of hell. And whether hell is actually a lake of fire is probably not the case, but imagine being thrown in a lake of fire. And you'll get some idea of the demise and the end of those that decided to follow Satan. So Satan ends up in the lake of fire, and the beast, that is those in the Roman Empire who followed him in there as well. All right, I'll give you guys next week a handout to kind of cover more out of 17 and 18 and 19. But what I want to do is we'll run through a little bit of chapter 20, and then what I really want to do, we'll have about 3 classes, is get to the part that hadn't happened yet. That's why I'm moving the way that I'm moving, because I want time to deal with chapter 21 and 22, because there is stuff to look forward to, and we do need to know what that is. All right, thanks for being here.